The alarm on my wrist pulsed twice before I even opened my eyes. And that was wrong, because nothing on this station was supposed to reach my private channel without going through 3 layers of clearance first. I sat up in the dark and read the message again. A breach in the lower corridor. No confirmation from the other guards. No confirmation from the system either, which meant someone had already touched it. I pulled on my boots and moved. My name is Ronan Blake, and 3 weeks ago, I was the joke of this entire security detail. The cheapest hire on the roster, brought in to guard a young alien diplomat named Selvi Andranos because humans, as everyone kept reminding me, worked for less and lived shorter, so nobody minded much if we got used up. The other guards were built for this job in ways I wasn't. A Karnesh warframe named DOS stood 2.5 meters tall, with plated skin that could shrug off most hand weapons. A pair of Ethuan twins, Vale and Sora, could read a room's emotional temperature before they even walked into it. Then there was me. Soft skin, slow eyes by their standards, no armor plating, just a sidearm and a uniform that didn't even fit right the first week. They laughed about it openly. DOS used to say I was decoration, something to make the client feel like they were getting full coverage without the cost. Vale once asked me, in front of the whole team, how many minutes I thought I'd last if things got serious. I told her I didn't know. She laughed, like that was the funniest thing she'd heard all cycle. I let them laugh. It cost me nothing. What I did instead, every night after my shift ended, was walk the station. Not the parts I was assigned to, all of it. The maintenance shafts, the old cargo routes, the places where the environmental systems bent around support struts and left gaps just wide enough for a body to slip through. Nobody told me to do this. Nobody paid me extra for it. I did it because a bodyguard who only knows the front door isn't guarding anything. Now, moving fast through the lower corridor with my sidearm drawn, that quiet, unpaid, unnoticed work was the only thing standing between Selvi Andranos and whatever had just come through the hull. The corridor lights flickered as I reached the junction. Ahead, the access panel to the old cargo route hung open, torn from its hinges with a precision that told me this wasn't an accident, and it wasn't clumsy. Whoever did this knew exactly where the weak point was. I keyed my comm. This is Blake. I have a breach at Cargo Junction 7, requesting status on the rest of the detail. Silence answered me first, then static, then, faint and broken, DOS's voice came through. Blake, stand down. We have this handled on the upper level. Go back to your post. I didn't move back. I moved forward. Because I had walked this corridor 40 times in the dark when nobody was watching, and I knew something the sensors on the upper level didn't. Cargo Junction 7 didn't lead anywhere important. It was a dead end, a decoy route that looked like it might connect to the diplomatic wing, but actually looped back on itself. Anyone using local maps would waste time here. Anyone using inside information would know to skip it entirely and head straight for the maintenance shaft 2 levels down, the one that ran directly beneath Selvi's private quarters. Which meant the breach at Junction 7 wasn't the real attack. It was a distraction, meant to pull every guard on the roster toward the wrong corridor, while the real team moved underneath us all. I turned and ran the other way. The maintenance shaft entrance was hidden behind a panel that looked like ordinary wall paneling, unless you already knew where the seam was. I found it in the dark without slowing down, because I had traced that seam with my own fingers a dozen times before, memorizing it the way some people memorize a song. Inside the shaft, the air was thinner, and there was a smell I recognized immediately, sharp and metallic, the residue left behind by a cutting tool working through a support strut. Someone had been here recently. Someone was planning to come back through. I climbed fast, following the shaft up toward the underside of Selvi's quarters, and that was when I heard voices below me, low and quick, speaking a language I didn't know, but a tone I understood perfectly. Confidence. The kind of confidence that comes from believing nobody is watching. There were 4 of them, dressed in dark travel gear with no insignia, moving through a gap they had already cut into the floor panel of the room above. Professional. Quiet. Not soldiers exactly, more like the kind of people hired specifically because they don't leave evidence behind. I had one advantage they didn't know about. I had spent 3 weeks becoming a person nobody bothered to track. I dropped down behind the last one in line before he even registered movement, and the encounter ended fast and without noise. The way these things are supposed to when someone actually knows what they're doing instead of relying on size or reputation. The second one turned at the wrong moment, and I used the narrow space of the shaft against him, the walls too tight for him to bring his weapon fully around before I closed the distance. The third one shouted something into a comm device, a name, a code word maybe, calling for support. I didn't understand the words, but I understood the panic underneath them, and panic is the same in every language. By the time I reached the fourth, the young diplomat's quarters above us had gone from silent to alarmed, meaning Selvi herself had woken and triggered the room's internal lockdown, sealing her door from the inside. Good. That was exactly what she was supposed to do. And I felt something like relief cut through the tension in my chest, because at least one part of this was going right. The fourth intruder backed away from me with his hands raised, not in surrender, but reaching for something at his belt, and I moved before he could finish the motion. When it was over, the shaft was quiet again, and I stood there for a moment just breathing, letting my heart slow down, before keying my comm. This is Blake. Threat neutralized at the maintenance access beneath the diplomatic quarters. I need backup and a full sweep of this level. This time, the silence on the other end lasted longer. Say again? Doss's voice finally came through, tight and strange. You said neutralized. All four? All four, I said. Junction 7 was a diversion. The real breach point was the shaft under Selvi's room. You need to get people down here now, because if there were 4 here, there could be more elsewhere. And I don't know yet if this was the whole plan, or just the first piece of it. There was a pause, and then footsteps, fast ones, coming from the direction of the stairwell. Vale reached the shaft entrance first, weapon drawn, eyes wide when she saw the scene below. She didn't say anything mocking this time. She didn't say anything at all for a long moment. How, she finally managed, did you know to come here? I walk the station, I said. Every night. I know where the weak points are, because I looked for them before anyone needed me to. She stared at me, like she was seeing a different person than the one she'd laughed at 3 weeks earlier. By the time Selvi's door finally unsealed and she stepped out, pale and shaken but unharmed, the corridor had filled with the rest of the security detail, along with 2 officers from the station's central command, both of them talking urgently into handheld devices. I stood off to the side, letting the noise happen around me, watching Selvi's eyes find mine across the crowded hallway. She didn't say thank you in front of everyone. She just gave me a small nod, the kind that meant more than words would have, and then let the officers guide her toward a secure room for questioning. I thought that would be the end of it, at least for the night. I was wrong. An hour later, one of the command officers, a sharp-featured woman named Elena Doskar, approached me in the corridor, with a data tablet held against her chest, like she wasn't sure whether to hand it over. We ran your registration through the deeper archive, she said. Standard procedure. After an incident like this, I need to ask you something, and I need an honest answer. Go ahead, I said. Your service record before this posting is sealed under a classification I don't have clearance to open. Not agency level. Higher. I've never seen a human file locked that deep. She studied my face carefully. Who are you, actually? I didn't answer right away. Some things aren't mine to explain, not because I'm hiding something shameful, but because the people who sealed that record had good reasons, and those reasons weren't about protecting me. I'm the bodyguard you hired, I said finally. That's the part that matters tonight. She didn't push further, not then. But something had already started moving through the station's communication channels, quiet at first, then faster, the way rumors spread when people sense there's a real story underneath the surface. The next morning, the truth started arriving from an unexpected direction. Not from the station's own systems, but from the group who had sent those 4 intruders in the first place. Their operation hadn't ended with the 4 bodies in the maintenance shaft. That had only been the forward team, meant to slip in quietly and remove Selvi before anyone noticed a larger plan taking shape around the station. The larger plan was still in motion, a coordinated strike meant to hit 3 separate points across the outer ring during the diplomatic summit, using the confusion of one failed strike to mask the real one. I learned this because their command structure made a mistake. When the forward team went silent, someone higher up in their organization pulled the personnel files for everyone assigned to Selvi's detail, trying to understand what had gone wrong. And when they reached my name, something in their communications changed entirely. Elena brought me into a secure briefing room that afternoon, along with Doss, the twins, and two officers I hadn't met before. On the main screen was an intercepted transmission, translated in real time, the voice on it clipped and tense. The Andranos detail includes a human-designated Ronan Blake, the translated voice said. Confirm this before proceeding. If confirmed, Command wants an immediate abort on the outer ring strike. A second voice, calmer, older, responded. Confirmed. Records match. The same Blake from the Kestrel Corridor incident, 3 years prior. There was a long pause on the recording, and then the first voice spoke again, quieter this time, almost unwilling to say it out loud. Then we're not doing this. Pull everyone back. I don't care what Command says. Nobody who was at Kestrel goes near that name again. The room around me had gone completely silent. Every eye in the briefing room was on me now, waiting. I let out a slow breath. I hadn't expected that name to follow me here, not after everything I'd done to keep it buried under a normal assignment and a normal life. 3 years ago, I said, because they clearly weren't going to stop staring until I explained something. There was a conflict at a supply corridor called Kestrel, out past the edge of charted space. It doesn't matter to anyone here what exactly happened, only that it ended the way it ended, and word of it spread through certain circles that don't usually talk to people like us. After that, my old service placed me under deep cover, because staying visible would have made me a target for anyone looking to settle old business. Getting assigned here as a low-cost bodyguard wasn't an accident. It was exactly the kind of quiet, forgettable posting that keeps a person invisible. Invisible, Vale repeated slowly. Until last night. Until last night, I agreed. Doss, who hadn't said a single mocking word since the maintenance shaft, finally spoke, his deep voice unusually careful. We laughed at you. For weeks. You did, I said, without any heat in it. It's fine. That was the point. Nobody watches the guard everyone already dismissed. Elena set the tablet down and looked at me with an expression somewhere between apology and disbelief. The strike on the outer ring has been called off entirely. Their command tried to override the field team's decision, and the field team refused. They're pulling out of the region completely, rather than risk crossing paths with you again. I felt the weight of that settle over the room slowly, the way real relief always does, quiet instead of loud. They're not afraid of me specifically, I said, because it felt important that they understood this correctly. They're afraid of what happened once, and what it might mean if it happened again. Fear like that isn't really about one person. It's about a memory nobody wants repeated. Selvi Andranos was brought into the room a few minutes later, once the officers had confirmed the outer ring threat was fully stood down. She listened to the summary quietly, her sharp young eyes moving between the translated transmission and my face. When the briefing ended and the room began to empty, she stayed behind, waiting until it was just the two of us. You could have told me who you were, she said. From the beginning. I could have, I said, but you didn't hire a name. You hired someone to do a job, and I did it. The rest was never supposed to matter. She considered that for a long moment. It matters to me, not because of what happened at Kestrel, whatever that was, because of what you did last night. Walking corridors nobody asked you to walk, learning a station nobody expected you to memorize, showing up exactly where you were needed, before anyone else even understood there was a need. That has nothing to do with a name. That's just who you are. I didn't have a good answer for that, so I stayed quiet, and she seemed to understand. I'm requesting you stay on permanently, she said, not as part of a rotating detail, as my personal guard, directly under my authority. I don't want the cheapest option anymore. I want the one who actually shows up. I thought about the 3 weeks of quiet mockery, the late nights spent walking corridors alone, the sidearm that never fit quite right in the holster they issued me, and the strange, heavy feeling of a name I had tried so hard to leave behind, finally catching up to me in the one place I hadn't expected it to matter. I'll stay, I said. Word of the outer ring stand-down spread through the station over the following days, and with it, a quieter story about the human guard nobody had taken seriously. People stopped making jokes about slow reflexes and short lifespans. Doss started nodding at me in the hallway instead of looking past me. Vale asked, once, carefully, whether I'd be willing to walk her through how I'd mapped the maintenance shafts, and I said yes, because there was no reason to keep that knowledge to myself anymore. Nobody asked me directly what happened at Kestrel, not after that first briefing. I think they understood, without needing it spelled out, that some stories are better left as a closed door rather than an open one. What mattered wasn't the details of what I'd done 3 years earlier. What mattered was that a name attached to a quiet, unglamorous posting had been enough to turn an entire invasion force around without a single further shot fired, and that the same steady, patient work nobody had valued at first was exactly what stopped 4 intruders from ever reaching Selvy's door. A week later, standing at my new post outside her private office, one of the newer station staff members passed by and asked, half joking, half genuinely curious, why an entire strike force had backed off over one guard's name. I thought about how to answer that honestly without saying too much, and settled on the simplest version of the truth. Because reputations aren't built from what you say about yourself, I said. They're built from what you do when nobody's watching, and what happens after word finally gets out. She didn't fully understand what I meant, not yet, and that was fine. Some lessons only make sense after you've lived through the quiet part first, the long unnoticed nights before anyone realizes what they're worth. I turned back toward the office door, took my position, and kept watching the corridor the way I always did, the way I always would, whether anyone was paying attention or not.